What is something you've done purely out of the goodness of your heart, but have never told anyone? I lost my mom earlier this year and am still working through the grief. The first week I came back, my co-workers had gave me a check for several $100s as a kind gesture. I was truly overwhelmed by the generosity. The following week I came into the break room to find one of the techs with a lost look on her face. She had just gotten a phone call that her brother had been murdered the night before. She had moved to our city just a year prior and didn't have any family close by. As I held her and listened to her cry, I booked her a flight home. It was several $100s as she is from a small town and the flight was for later that day. I told her to go be with family and let me know when she was ready to come back. I had no doubt that is exactly what my mom would have wanted me to do. Waiting to see my doctor, I see an elderly man with a walker talking to a driver's service for seniors. Handicapped people about get on him a ride home. Apparently there was a mix-up and they couldn't get a driver there. My doctor called me in and when I came out, the elderly man was still there talking to the driver's service. I told the guy if he trusts me I'll take him home. He responded, but I haven't seen the doctor yet. I told him I'll wait. Dude looked like he was going to cry. He was actually a really nice man and it was a pleasant ride. As a former teacher, I've had a student that was left at school after a really great field trip. Her mom was getting her hair done and basically told her she needed to wait at the school until she finished. She told her, on the phone, that she shouldn't have gone on the field trip if she wanted to come home that night. My student was 11. I waited with her for 2 hours after we had returned. We did puzzles, jump roped, and just talked about life. I often think about her and how's she doing. I would have driven her home myself if I could have. Nothing like the other ones, but my mom had saved forever to buy herself her dream dining table and chairs. They were super expensive but she had a picture on the fridge. Saved for a year and knew she'd have them forever. I visited one day when she wasn't home. My parents have no issue with us coming over without them there, and noticed the dogs had gotten in an absolutely destroyed one. They were still untrained puppies and had ripped off all the material, buttons, etc. I popped it in my car, threw it out, found a place an hour away with the same chair and bought it. $300 chair, so wasn't cheap. She doesn't know because she would have A, been shattered but found a way to fix it as best as possible, which honestly would have been impossible, and B, refused for me to replace something at that cost. I'm just glad it was me who saw it first. She's happy and always comments on how nice her table is and how she will have it forever. Lol. Edit. Wow. Thank you all for the awards. I'm so shocked. My mom is an absolutely amazing woman, so there was no hesitation in doing this. She is darn stubborn when it comes to getting gifts from her children, though, so this was a way for me to say thank you, in my mind, at least, that she couldn't refuse. Haha. I was getting some breakfast one time after a late night out. I was sitting in the restaurant waiting for my food and this younger boy comes in, probably 13, 14 or so, and orders some food. By the way he was dressed and how he looked you could tell he was definitely living in rough times. He ordered and when they told him the total he pulled some wadded up $1 bills from his pocket and some change. He ended up like $4.05 short. He had this defeated look on his face and apologized and turned to walk out. I stopped him, asked the cashier to ring up his order, added a large drink and an extra burrito to it, and paid for the whole thing. He tried to give me the money he had and when I refused he just stood there and slowly tears came over his eyes. I told him to stay strong and not give up because things will get better. I walked out and barely made it to my car before I broke down too. I used to be that kid. I was cleaning out my car at one of the big stops where they have pull-up parking with a vacuum hose on both sides. This car pulled in next to me trying to park in the space between the spots. Me being cynical, I'm annoyed and grumbling in my head. Turns out it was this little old lady. For some people the soft spot is kids or animals, but for me it's old people. Anyway, I helped her get her parking sorted and ended up vacuuming her car out as well. In my eyes it looked pretty spotless already. My grandma treated her car the same way. By the end she was in tears when saying her thank yous. What took me all of 10 minutes would have taken her much longer. Felt good. When I was 19 I needed blood work done and it was super icy out. I just finished and was getting ready to leave when two elderly ladies came in. They commented on how slippery it was and if the clinic had anyone to help them walk back to their car. They were told no, so I sat back down and waited. Half an hour later they went in and the receptionist told me I could leave. I was done. I told her I know and sat there. When the ladies came out they looked a little scared to walk outside and they stood up and said I heard them ask for help and I would help them to their car. I walked the ladies one at a time, letting them hold me for support as I shuffled us to their car. Then, after they were both safely inside, I scraped the ice off their car so they could leave. They offered me money, but I refused and just wished them safe travels. After they left I went to my own car, where I proceeded to fall on my butt 5 times. I have an ongoing silent feud with one branch of my family, my dad's cousins and their kids, my second cousins, and we haven't spoken or really seen each other in over 10 years. I've pretty much written them off. And I don't really care if we live out the rest of our lives without patching things up. 2 months ago, one of my cousins from that branch unexpectedly died at the age of 38. Their immediate family had always had financial troubles, so while I didn't fly across the country to attend the funeral, I quietly sent my sister a bunch of money and instructed her to pretend it was hers and pay off part of their funeral expenses. And then just last week, some of my other relatives started a GoFundMe for one of my aunts in that branch. She's my dad's oldest cousin. She has stage 4 cervical cancer and wants to leave the hospital to pass away at home surrounded by her loved ones, but the hospital won't release her until her medical bills are paid in full. This is in another country. I haven't told my dad or anyone else in the family, but I anonymously donated my last paycheck plus the money I had been saving for my upcoming birthday trip. I don't really consider it out of the goodness of my heart, though. It's just that the thought of an elderly, terminally ill person dying alone somewhere that isn't home eats away at me so much that I physically couldn't sit by and do nothing. One weekend when I was in my teens, I was wandering around outside daydreaming as bored teenagers with no close friends tend to do. In the vicinity of an old one-room schoolhouse, I found a plastic jar that said "Open Me" on the lid, and I did so. The jar was filled with dry black-eyed peas, plus, buried within, a small illustrated flyer that said "Goodbye, Earl." It was a certificate from a local country music station redeemable for free tickets to a Dixie Chicks concert. I found out the next day from a classmate that it was part of a contest in which the station gave out daily clues during airtime as to the jar's location, so listeners could search for it. I had stumbled across it entirely by coincidence. I had no interest in country music, but I knew that a girl in one of my classes was a Dixie Chicks fanatic. A couple days after finding it, toward the end of class, I left the certificate on the floor by her desk where she would find it. I had never spoken to this person, nor would I go on to. Beyond the shared space of a classroom, our millie-ucks did not intersect. Her look of sheer, incredulous joy and the way she rushed to catch up with one of her friends to show her as the class filed out was the highlight of my day. A lot of homeless people in Lahaina, on the island of Maui, get by on fishing. One night, while leaving a restaurant, my girlfriend and I saw an elderly man sleeping near the old banyan tree. She pointed out that the fishing pole next to him had been snapped multiple times, with splintered ends and everything, probably by some a-hole tourist. Knowing that fishing pole was how he'd kept himself fed and seeing his livelihood compromised like that really bothered us. So my girlfriend and I got in my car and drove to the only Walmart on the island in Kahului. All the stores in Lahaina usually close by sundown. We bought a new fishing pole and gear and drove back to Lahaina, fearing the cops might suspect him of stealing this new gear. My girlfriend wrote a note on the receipt saying, "Hold on to this," and left it in the tackle box. When we got back to the banyan tree, I set the gear down next to the old man. The next day, we saw him fishing with the new pole on Front Street. Please remember to practice aloha. Edit number 1, thanks for the gold and silver. Edit number 2, since a few people asked in the comments, the reason we know it was likely a tourist is because it was definitely not a local. Locals treat each other's fishing gear as sacred. To intentionally damage or steal one is as taboo as a Texan stealing his neighbor's propane-powered grill. My friend from college was struggling to get the money to pay for his cat's surgery. We did everything we could to raise the money. I even asked my father to put this little donation box on his craft beer bar. But we were still missing a few bucks. My friend doesn't know it, but I added some really good money to the box before handing it to him and, I still remember how grateful he was when he saw the money was more than enough. He almost told me, after the surgery, that he never believed we could make it, but he saw the dedication I put into it and believed in me. My dad was a plumber, AC repairman, general handyman and did the same shit. I found out when he died that if he could tell a family couldn't afford the quote, he'd tell them to just hold off. He'd show up once he got off work and do everything for the cost of parts. He woke up to a lot of replies to this and I appreciate the kind words. He would have been 58 this weekend, so it's nice to see a simple story about him was so well received. I could probably fill up this thread with stories about him like this. He was definitely a selfless man. When I was in high school, there was a girl that never talked to anyone, was all alone, and I never once saw her speak for long periods of time, unless it was for projects or something, but that really isn't the main thing. The first time we had the Valentine's Day party, I noticed she seemed really down, because, I think, all the other girls were getting flowers and such from the boys. You could buy flowers and other stuff for someone if you wanted, so I kind of felt bad. I decided to buy her a flower, but anonymously. When she received the flower, she seemed confused, but at least she smiled. The next year, same thing happened, every girl with flowers except for her, so I did the same. This time she once more seemed surprised, but not bad surprised. Happy surprised. Next year one did the same, but this time I gave her a whole bouquet of flowers. She seemed overflowing with joy. People asked her who gave her those, and she said she didn't know, but was happy. Maybe not the most interesting story here, but putting a smile on someone really made me feel happy. There's a semi-secluded bus stop beside a store I used to work at, and the homeless guy started sleeping there on the bench halfway between the stop and the parking lot one winter. One day I got to work 15 minutes early and saw him sleeping, wearing just a flannel and jeans, so I ran into the store, bought a blanket, and covered him up with it. He never woke up, so he didn't know it was me. Every time I saw him sitting on the bench he had the blanket wrapped around him. I was extremely stressed and took a mental health day, planning on going to mom's and crying myself to sleep. We ended up going to the mall, and even though money was really tight for her, she wanted to buy me lunch. We split the bill. She realized that she lost a newer $50 bill while walking around. She was devastated. I traded my smaller bills to a cashier for a newer $50, folded it like she would, and tossed it under the seat of her car. The next day she called me, almost crying because she was excited to find it and said that without it, groceries would have been pretty tight that week. Taking me out that day prevented me from having a full breakdown. I think $50 was a small price to pay for what she did for me that day. My brother is a heroin addict and has been homeless for 15 years. In November he wound up in a coma with severe blood poisoning and ultimately lost both of his legs to frostbite. Broke my heart because apparently frostbite is extremely common in the homeless community and a lot of those you see in wheelchairs. That is how they lost their limbs. So I put together 10 winter kits, each with new socks, a beanie and gloves, a face mask, rain poncho, emergency blanket, water bottles, some food, chapstick and many hand-feet warmers. Kept them in my car and handed them out whenever I saw someone in need. Edit. Wow, woke up to such love. Thank you. This is kinda a long one, but I'll try to keep it sorta short. Back when quarantine and stuff first started, I was headed back from the store and came across a broken down car. He had almost made it into the CVS parking lot, but the car gave out just outside of it. I pulled into the parking lot and asked if he wanted to push out of the road. He did. I pushed the car, and got it halfway up the little incline going into the parking lot, but couldn't get it any further by myself. He had a bad leg and couldn't help. Plus he needed to be behind the wheel, but it was out of the street. I asked him what happened, and he told me he had run out of gas. Asked if he had a gas can, and he pulled out a small gas can. I offered to run it down to the gas station and bring it back. On the way back from filling it up, I began to think to myself that this little bit of gas wouldn't get him very far, and as I had just gotten paid and had just pulled some cash from the bank, figured he could use a little help. When I got to the guy, I gave him the gas can as well as $40 and I told him, I'm not sure how far you need to go, but that little bit of gas isn't gonna get you very far. I hope this helps you out some. He just looked at the money and back at me, like I'd given him the keys to a new house or something. He started telling me, I get paid tomorrow, I can give you my address and I will pay you back, but I insisted I didn't want anything in return. He looked like he was on the verge of tears. He explained how he had just gotten out of jail a few months before and was trying really hard to stay on the right path, working an honest job and everything, but that it was hard. He told me he would take my kindness as a sign that he was on the right path and thanked me several times. Had I known how much it meant to him, I would have given him more. I hope he's doing well. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was volunteering at a local pizza shop to distribute slices to kids who otherwise couldn't get fed because the schools were shut down. There was a woman with 3 kids that came by every few days to get slices. Turns out the father had died unexpectedly right before the pandemic started and they lost their house because of the slumlord they were renting from. The mother lost her job because she had no one to watch the kids. They were living in their minivan and things were bad for them. They were so nice and grateful, but ashamed when they'd come by to get slices that I genuinely felt for them. I had lost my job and got a pretty decent windfall of 2 months' worth of unemployment and the CARES Act at once. My landlord had a few properties open and is a close friend, so I got in touch with him and we worked out me paying their security deposit and the first 2 months of rent and he'd cover their utilities. I gave her his number and said he might be able to help and they moved in the next day. They've been there ever since and are doing extremely well now. Edit. Whoa, this blew up in a matter of no time. Thank you, everyone. I was homeless at one point in my life, but didn't have children. I couldn't just stand idly by, especially because I had been given way more money than I even knew what to do with. With everything that was happening and uncertainty of what was coming, I figured that money needed to be used for good rather than my own selfish needs. A lady was fleeing an abusive marriage without much more than her kids and the clothes on her back. Word went out within a whisper network requesting a few essentials she needed. Packed up several things from the request list and also one thing that wasn't requested. I make jewelry as a hobby. Put a pair of handmade earrings into a gift bag. silver and pearls. Added a handwritten note that every woman deserves something beautiful and sending good wishes her way. On winter weekdays when I go downtown to practice the organ, there's usually a destitute man on the front steps of the locked church. When I unlock the door, I invite him in out of the cold and let him sleep on a cushioned pew in the relative warmth of the building while I practice or teach organ lessons. He's always very appreciative of the relief from being outside and leaves with obvious appreciation when it's time for me to go.